So my assessment of the possibilities open to Jordan Peterson, um, in my view, um, clearly Peterson doesn't intend to go lounge in a corner somewhere. He intends to stay on the public scene, and which means on the world stage. Therefore, affecting many young people. Therefore. If we follow Strauss's advice, it then becomes necessary to pay attention to what people who are wielding considerable influence are doing, even if they are very defective and lack the knowledge to uh, construe even relatively simple texts, such as um, some of the Marxist Communist Manifesto correctly in even one line. Um, um, so first of all, we should consider what Jung says. Jung um, tells us that personality seems to have built-in limits to some extent, so that views accumulate around a given personality which seem to be appropriate to them. I give a somewhat grotesque example of Bob Dylan. It was a very small personality, relatively speaking, but and therefore, when he won the Nobel Prize, it was somewhat uh, perplexing. Although he's very popular, so it's obvious that there was a lot of people liked his music. I thought what Sir David Tang said was quite appropriate, or what he wrote in his article in the weekend edition of the Financial Times at the time of that prize, is that that if we are to call such people geniuses as Bob Dylan, then what term do we have left over for Stockhausen, or for Bach, or for uh, those were the great musicians. So likewise, we're having some problem. Peterson is not such a grotesque case, and sometimes there are cases like Hermann Hesse, for instance, declared, and he noticed of himself, "I'm not one of the emperors of humanity as he would recognize Goethe to be," but he declared that he was a prince, which is probably in some way accurate. But he was a much smaller personality than a Goethe, or than a Dostoevsky, or many of the most towering figures. So Peterson is a case which is more problematic because he's has some merit, but his limits are strained at this point. So I would recommend, for instance, that he make every attempt to be more intellectually honest concerning his positions on several issues, such as Marxism. So, one, as a practical recommendation, I would recommend that he get somebody that he can stand to talk to who really knows about Marx. So, I recommend Vladimir Brovkin, Brovkin. He would probably accept an invitation to an interview, and I think that would be very helpful, because the things that Peterson says are idiotic, and they totally lack any intellectual credibility, and therefore they're harmful to the people that he is taking under his wing, young people that are often needy people, which he may help in some way, but he's also misleading in other ways. The point is not to advocate Marxism, but to understand the dynamics in play in the world in a way that is adequate to face the world. Otherwise, you're dealing with a chimera, or some kind of fata morgana, and that's you're not equipped to navigate the waters. So, in this sense, I'm saying Peterson, as he now stands, should not be allowed to come anywhere close to the rudder of the ship of state in the old Platonic metaphor, which is a strained metaphor since we're dealing with the whole world, largely in the effect that words in the public sphere have. Um, so, for instance, I mean, what is Peterson? Is Peterson, just to give a slight critique on my own, I'm not a great expert on Marx, but it's obvious to me that um, what Peterson says in this sphere is just foolishness. I mean, is Peterson against? I mean, is Peterson for chaining children to wagons? Is he for in the factories, in sweatshops, in coal mines, which is one of the things Marx was dealing with? We're talking in the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s. We're talking at a time when there were the right wing was for child labor in a serious way, and the left wing, as represented by somebody like Gladstone, was trying to overcome that. Gladstone, who is now a total relic and who nobody would recognize in a serious way because his positions are back behind even Tucker Carlson. His positions, the movement of history requires that we know something about the conditions in which Marx was speaking. They require that we know something about the terms of art Marx was using. They required that we know a great deal of things to correctly interpret one line of Marx. Merely reading the text as though they refer to the present day is only a game. It's only a game, and it's a bad game because it misleads everyone involved. And at best, you kind of win a debate, but you win a debate in a way that's harmful to yourself, except in some very short term. Uh, well, that's the thing. So, yeah, it would be a proof that one only cared about the short term in the sense of the politician who only wants to be reelected if Peterson were to deliberately hold to some of his positions, which simply make no sense. Um, so I think he should take stock of some of the strong arguments connected to the fact that society changes, that the position of women in the world has changed radically as Peterson has a problem where he passes everything off as some kind of technological advance, like contraception came in, so that must be all that matters with regard to feminism or something like that. But that doesn't work because you have to look at what's actually been happening for the last couple hundred years with the entry of women into the professions, with the law schools today having more women enrolled than men, whereas for thousands of years that wasn't so. Um, yeah, you can link it to in some way. You can bring in an analysis on the basis of technological easement, but you still have to admit that these changes are happening constantly, and therefore you have to throw out the thesis of the Pareto number. A 19th century analysis of Italy and the distribution of land in Italy, then linked to the massive stars in the galaxy by Peterson. This is, on the face of it, it would be interesting, except that we know that that the situation, as I've just exampled with women, has changed, and that other such changes have been constantly happening. So if you're just doing polemics, that's not going to make it. That just takes you out of reality, I would say. We want to know what storms are going to be faced, what the waters are like, so we can navigate accordingly. We don't want arguments that lead to niche positions which can be held until they can't be held. such as the today with the. I mean that stretches us into the very ground that he claims to be against postmodernism, in the sense that if one has to ask, for instance, about chemtrails and more close to what quite a few people still are believing about Trump's having the election stolen from him or something like that. And then you get into a question of whether maybe it's not good to believe in the truth, but it's good to believe in whatever benefits the party or whatever, and therefore oneself, something like that. If you start to get into negotiations like that, um, then again, we can admit that we're doing some kind of. I just don't see from the point of view of intellectual candor that one can really get into that unless one admits one's doing it, as sometimes the RT, excuse me, sometimes the, yeah, sometimes the RT, a few of the more intelligent people on the RT, although a lot of them are pretty bad. Oksana Boyko, for instance, will admit that. And that's an honest position, but it's a difficult position. But simply to say that by being veracious, that one is personally honest, that one is speaking the truth, that's just idiocy. Because obviously I can say what I believe and be wrong and not have said what is. So we have to be more open to the fact that we don't know what the truth is. But then we have, there's a lot of elbow room still to work with, because we have this Protagorean kind of position where we recognize that some people know more about things than others, and not just that they know more about things, but in this Jungian sense, we have to bring in that our personalities may be limited in a certain sense, and then we can look and see, here's some people whose personalities aren't limited in that sphere, and what do they say, even if it doesn't make sense to me. I think that's a hard problem to broach, but it has to be broached, and it can only be broached by edging into the subject matter of personality and seeing where one has reached one's limits, but one can still look beyond to others who don't suffer from the same limitations. Um, okay, so that's what I have to say about that. I think I'd try to um, make some commentary on the small essay that I wrote just now on the return of this trade, and try to explicate my position vis-a-vis the waters as they seem to me.